The Great Hall of Nexus Prime had never been so quiet in all its 10,000 years of existence. And the 400 species who had gathered there could feel something terrible in the air. Something that made even the bravest warriors shift in their seats with unease. Fleet Commander Vorath Keshan walked slowly toward the central platform, his heavy boots echoing against the crystal floor with each step he took. And every eye in the chamber followed his movement with a mixture of curiosity and fear. He was a Dracorian, a member of the most feared warrior species in the known galaxy, and his body told the story of countless battles he had fought and won. His thick gray carapace was covered in scars, some old and faded, others still fresh and healing, and his forearms hung at his sides like weapons waiting to be used. But something was different about this legendary commander today. Something that made the representatives whisper to each other in confusion and growing alarm. His eyes, which had once burned with the fire of conquest and the joy of battle, now held an emotion that no one had ever seen in a Dracorian warrior before. They held fear, deep and genuine fear that seemed to come from the very core of his being. The Dracorians had ruled their corner of the galaxy for 12,000 years. And in all that time, they had never known defeat, never signed a peace treaty, never retreated from any enemy they had chosen to destroy. Yet here stood their greatest commander, looking like a soldier who had seen something that had broken his understanding of war itself. Vorath reached the platform and stood before the holographic projector, taking a long moment to look across the assembled representatives. He saw the Velthrani with their flowing robes and ancient wisdom, the Krikstar with their insectoid bodies and hive minds, the Silurians with their aquatic suits and diplomatic smiles, and hundreds of other species who had come to hear what the Dracorian Dominion had to say. He pressed a button on his wrist device, and a holographic image appeared above the projector. It showed a small blue planet spinning slowly in the darkness of space, covered in swirls of white clouds and patches of green and brown land. Many of the representatives leaned forward to get a better look, recognizing the world from recent intelligence reports that had spread through the galaxy like wildfire. You have all received the reports from the Expansion Directorate, Vorath began, his deep voice carrying across the silent chamber with a weight that made everyone listen carefully. You know what world this is, and you know that my people went there 3 solar cycles ago with the intention of adding it to our empire. He paused, and the silence in the hall grew even deeper, more intense, more filled with anticipation. What you do not know is why I'm standing here today. Why the Dracorian Dominion has signed an unconditional ceasefire with the species that calls this small world their home. A murmur ran through the assembly, and Vorath could see the shock on faces throughout the chamber. An unconditional ceasefire was something the Dracorians had never agreed to. In their entire history as a spacefaring civilization, the Velthrani ambassador rose from her seat, her silver eyes wide with disbelief, and her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. Commander Vorath, surely there must be some mistake in this translation. The Dracorian Dominion does not sign ceasefires, and certainly not unconditional ones. Your people have conquered over 200 species without ever offering terms of peace. Vorath turned to face her, and the fear in his eyes seemed to grow even stronger as he prepared to answer her question. There is no mistake, Ambassador. The Dominion has agreed to withdraw all forces from the Sol system and to never return. We have agreed to pay compensation for the damage we caused, and we have agreed to recognize the humans as a sovereign species with full rights under galactic law. The chamber erupted in noise as representatives shouted questions and demanded explanations. But Vorath raised one of his 4 hands, and the authority in that simple gesture brought silence back to the hall. I am not here to justify the decisions of my government, he continued, his voice now carrying a tone of warning that made several species instinctively move back in their seats. I am here to issue a warning. A warning that may save your civilizations from the fate that nearly destroyed mine." He turned back to the holographic image of the blue planet. And when he spoke again, his words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples of fear that spread through every corner of the assembly. Never, under any circumstances, cross humanity. The Crickstar ambassador clicked his mandibles in what might have been amusement, his compound eyes showing no concern at the Dracorian's dramatic statement. "Commander, we have reviewed the data on these creatures. They are a primitive species, barely capable of reaching their own moon. They fight among themselves constantly. They poison their own world with pollution, and they cannot even agree on simple matters of governance. How could such a species pose any threat to advanced civilizations like ours?" Vorath turned to face the insectoid ambassador, and the look in his eyes made the Crickstar-ass amusement fade quickly into something closer to worry. "I thought the same thing when we first discovered them," Vorath admitted, his voice heavy with regret and hard-earned wisdom. "I stood before the High Command and assured them that Earth would fall within one lunar cycle, that the humans would surrender or die, and that we would add another world to our empire without significant cost." He shook his head slowly, a human gesture he had learned during his time fighting against them. "I was wrong, Ambassador. I was more wrong than I have ever been in my entire military career. And that mistake cost the Dominion more than any war we have ever fought." The assembly fell silent again, waiting for Vorath to continue, sensing that what he was about to tell them would change the way they viewed the galaxy forever. And Vorath, the scarred commander who had conquered 17 species, took a deep breath and began to tell them the story of how humanity had taught the Dracorian Dominion the true meaning of fear. Vorath activated another holographic display, and the assembly watched as images of the Dracorian war fleet appeared before them. 100 massive dreadnoughts, each one capable of destroying a small moon, hung in the darkness of space like predators waiting to strike. 3 solar cycles ago, our expansion scouts discovered radio signals coming from an unexplored region of the Orion Spur, Vorath explained, his voice taking on the tone of a teacher sharing a painful lesson. The signals were primitive, electromagnetic broadcasts that any advanced species would have abandoned thousands of years ago, and our scientists traced them to the third planet of a small yellow star. The holographic display changed to show Earth as the Dracorian scouts had first seen it, a world divided into hundreds of nations, constantly fighting small wars among themselves, polluting their own atmosphere, and completely unaware that they were not alone in the universe. Our assessment teams classified them as a Category 3 primitive species, Vorath continued. They had achieved basic space travel, putting machines on their moon and robots on nearby planets. But they had no faster-than-light technology, no energy shields, no plasma weapons, and no unified planetary government. The Silurian ambassador nodded his head, his gills fluttering with understanding beneath his aquatic suit. A standard pre-contact civilization, he observed. We have encountered dozens of similar species in our own expansion. They usually surrender within days once they understand the power gap between our technologies. That is exactly what we believed. Vorath agreed, and the bitterness in his voice was impossible to miss. The High Command decided that Earth was not worth the effort of diplomacy. Why negotiate with primitives when we could simply take what we wanted? He gestured at the holographic display, and it changed again to show the invasion fleet entering Earth's solar system. The dreadnoughts moved in perfect formation, their weapons charged and ready, their commanders confident of an easy victory. I led the fleet myself, Vorath admitted. I had conquered 17 species before Earth, and I saw no reason why these humans would be any different. We entered their system and broadcast our demands in every language our translators could identify. The recording of the original transmission played through the assembly speakers, and the representatives listened to the harsh words of the Dracorian ultimatum. Surrender immediately, accept Dominion rule, and your species will be allowed to survive as a labor force. Resist and face total destruction. Do you know what they did when they received our message? Vorath asked, and a strange smile crossed his scarred face. A smile that held no humor at all. They argued about it. Several representatives made sounds of confusion, not understanding why this was significant. They spent 3 of their days debating among themselves whether the message was real, whether they should respond, and what they should say if they did. Their world leaders held emergency meetings while their common people posted jokes about us on their primitive information networks. Vorath shook his head slowly. Still amazed by this memory, even after 3 years of war, we thought this was weakness. Proof that they were too divided and too foolish to pose any real threat. We thought their inability to take us seriously meant they would fall apart at the first real attack. The holographic display showed the first dropships descending through Earth's atmosphere, their armored hulls glowing red from the heat of entry, while human military forces scrambled to respond to the unprecedented invasion. We landed in their largest population centers, expecting immediate surrender. Instead, we found something that our tactical computers could not understand, something that made no logical sense to any species in the Dominion. Vorath paused, letting the tension build before he continued. They fought back. The Krigstar ambassador clicked his mandibles impatiently. Of course, they fought back. All species resist invasion at first. This is not unusual, Commander. You do not understand, Vorath replied, his voice growing harder. They did not just resist. Within hours of our landing, while their cities still burned and millions of their people lay dead, their scientists were already studying our weapons. Their engineers were taking apart captured equipment and figuring out how it worked. Their military leaders were sharing information across national boundaries that had been closed for generations. The holographic display showed human soldiers dragging Dracorian corpses into laboratories, working through the night to understand the alien technology, ignoring the devastation around them as they focused on finding weaknesses to exploit. Species that have been at war with each other for centuries suddenly became allies. Nations that had threatened to destroy each other with nuclear weapons were now sharing their most secret military technology. Political leaders who had refused to speak to each other for decades were now coordinating defense strategies. Vorath turned to face the assembly directly, making sure every representative could see the seriousness in his eyes. In 1 week, humanity went from a divided, bickering species to a unified war machine with a single purpose: survival. The Volthrani ambassador leaned forward, her ancient face showing genuine interest. But surely their primitive weapons could not match your technology. How did they hope to win against plasma cannons and energy shields? They did not hope to win, Vorath answered. At least not at first. They hoped to make us pay such a high price for their world that we would decide it was not worth taking. The holographic display showed images of human resistance fighters ambushing Dracorian patrols in ruined cities, of improvised explosive devices destroying supply convoys, of snipers picking off soldiers from positions that should have been impossible to reach. They turned every building into a fortress, every street into a kill zone, every civilian into a potential threat. Our soldiers could not tell who was a combatant and who was not, because among humans, anyone can become a warrior in an instant. Vorath's voice dropped lower, taking on a tone of reluctant respect. We had invaded many worlds before, and we had learned that most species break after a certain point. When enough of them die, when their leaders are killed, when their infrastructure is destroyed, they surrender and accept their fate. He looked directly at the Krigstar ambassador, who had dismissed the humans as primitives. Humans do not break. We killed millions of them, and millions more stepped forward to take their place. We destroyed their cities, and they moved into the ruins and kept fighting. We killed their leaders, and new leaders emerged within hours. The assembly sat in stunned silence as Voreth's words painted a picture of a species unlike any they had ever encountered. That was when I began to understand that we had made a terrible mistake. Voreth admitted, we had not invaded a primitive world. We had awakened something far more dangerous than we could have imagined. Voreth walked slowly across the platform, his four hands clasped behind his back, and the assembly could see the weight of memory pressing down on his shoulders like a physical burden. The first year of the war was the most confusing time in my entire military career. He began, his voice heavy with exhaustion that had not faded even after the fighting ended. Everything we knew about warfare, everything we had learned from conquering 17 other species, all of it was useless against the humans. The holographic display changed to show a map of Earth's surface, covered in red markers indicating Dracorian-controlled territory and blue markers showing human resistance zones. What struck the assembly was how the colors were mixed together, how there was no clear front line, no obvious boundary between victory and defeat, on paper. We were winning, Voreth explained. We controlled 60% of their land surface. We had destroyed their major military installations. We had killed millions of their soldiers and billions of their civilians. By any standard measurement, Earth should have surrendered within the first 3 months. The Silurian ambassador raised a tentacle to ask a question, Commander. Our own species has studied resistance movements on conquered worlds. Typically, such movements fade as resources run out and hope disappears. Did the humans not face the same problems? Voreth let out a sound that might have been a laugh, but there was no joy in it. The humans have a saying, he replied. They call it fighting out of spite. It means continuing to fight not because you believe you can win, but because you refuse to give your enemy the satisfaction of your surrender. Several representatives exchanged confused glances. Unable to understand this concept, let me explain what we faced, Voreth continued, pulling up new images on the holographic display. Our soldiers require a specific cycle of rest and nutrition to maintain combat effectiveness. After 18 standard hours of activity, a Dracorian warrior must sleep for at least 6 hours or his performance begins to degrade. The images show Dracorian camps surrounded by fortifications, guards patrolling the perimeters with heavy weapons, and soldiers sleeping in shifts inside armored buildings. The humans learned this pattern within the first month of the invasion. They did not read it in captured documents or learn it from interrogating prisoners. They observed us, tested us with small attacks at different times, and figured out when we were weakest. Voreth's voice grew darker as he continued the story. They began attacking our positions at exactly the times when most of our soldiers were in their rest cycle. They used small teams, never more than 20 or 30 fighters, striking fast and disappearing before we could organize a proper response. The holographic display showed night vision recordings of human guerrilla attacks. Small groups of fighters emerging from hidden tunnels, launching rockets at supply depots, setting fires to fuel storage facilities, and vanishing into the darkness before Dracorian reinforcements could arrive. We adapted our schedules, rotated our guard shifts, built better defenses, and every time we changed our tactics, they changed theirs to match. It was like fighting smoke. Every time we tried to grab hold of them, they slipped through our fingers and reformed somewhere else. The Krigstar ambassador shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his compound eyes reflecting the images on the holographic display. Surely your superior numbers and technology gave you the advantage in direct confrontations, he suggested. Why did you not simply force them into open battle? We tried, Voreth admitted. We launched massive offensive operations designed to draw their forces out of hiding and destroy them with overwhelming firepower. Do you know what they did? He paused, letting the question hang in the air. They let us take their territory. They abandoned their positions before we arrived, leaving behind traps and poisoned supplies. They retreated into mountains and jungles and underground tunnel networks that seemed to have no end. And when our forces were stretched thin trying to hold all this empty ground, they attacked our supply lines. The holographic display showed convoy after convoy being ambushed on roads that had been cleared just hours before. Dracorian vehicles burning in the night, while human fighters stripped them of weapons and ammunition before disappearing. Again, in the first year alone, we lost more supply vehicles to ambush than we had lost in all our previous conquests combined. The humans did not need to defeat our army. They simply needed to make sure our army could not eat. Vorath turned to face the assembly, his scarred face showing the strain of reliving these memories. But what truly broke our spirits was not the ambushes or the supply problems. It was the way they treated their own losses. The chamber fell silent, sensing that Vorath was about to share something important. When we kill Dracorian soldiers, their families mourn and the community holds ceremonies to honor the dead. This is natural. This is healthy. This is what any civilized species does. And after the mourning, life returns to normal. He shook his head slowly. Humans do not mourn like other species. When we killed their people, they did not simply grieve and move on. They turned their grief into anger, and they turned that anger into fuel for more fighting. The holographic display showed human memorial services that looked more like military rallies than funerals. Crowds of civilians chanting the names of the dead while volunteers lined up to join the resistance. Children learning to shoot weapons on the graves of their parents. For every human we killed, 10 more volunteered to fight. For every village we destroyed, the survivors walked to the next village and started organizing new resistance cells. They had a phrase they used: "We will never forget, and we will never forgive." Vara's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Do you understand what this means? Most species fight wars to achieve something: territory, resources, political power. Humans began fighting this war for survival, but somewhere along the way, it became something else entirely. He looked out at the assembly with eyes that had seen too much. It became personal. Every human on that planet had lost someone to our weapons. Every human had a reason to keep fighting that had nothing to do with strategy or resources or political goals. They wanted revenge, pure and simple, and they were willing to die to get it. The Velfrani ambassador spoke softly, her ancient voice trembling slightly. Commander, what you are describing sounds like a species that has embraced collective madness. Vorath nodded slowly. That is what I thought at first. But then I studied their history, and I realized something far more disturbing. He paused, letting the tension build. This is normal for them. They have done this to each other throughout their existence. Their history is filled with wars of revenge, feuds that lasted for generations. Conflicts that continued long after any rational reason for fighting had disappeared. His voice hardened with a mixture of fear and respect. We did not drive them to madness. We simply gave them a new target for behavior that has always been part of their nature. The holographic display flickered and changed, showing a timeline that made several representatives gasp in disbelief. It tracked the technological progress of humanity from the start of the invasion to the present day, and the speed of their advancement was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. In the second year of the war, our intelligence officers began reporting something that we initially dismissed as impossible, Vorath said, his voice carrying a tone of lingering disbelief. Human scientists, working in underground laboratories with stolen Dracorian equipment and materials scavenged from destroyed vehicles, were making breakthroughs that should have taken centuries. The Velthrani ambassador leaned forward, her silver eyes narrowing with intense interest. What kind of breakthroughs, Commander? Everything, Varth replied simply. They reverse-engineered our plasma weapons within 6 months. They cracked the basic principles of our shield technology within 8 months. And by the end of the 2nd year, they were building weapons that combined our technology with their own in ways our scientists had never imagined. The holographic display showed images of human fighters, carrying weapons that looked like crude combinations of human firearms and Dracorian energy systems. Ugly, improvised things that should not have worked at all, but which fired bolts of plasma that could punch through standard Dracorian armor. Our scientists were horrified. Varth continued. They said it was impossible. They said the humans did not have the theoretical background to understand the principles behind our technology. They said these weapons should explode in the hands of anyone who tried to use them. He paused, a strange expression crossing his scarred face. The humans did not care about theoretical backgrounds. They did not care about scientific principles. They saw that our weapons worked. They took them apart to see how they were built, and they built their own versions using whatever materials they could find. When their weapons exploded, they figured out why and built better ones. The Krigstar ambassador made a clicking sound of disbelief. This is not how technology works. Commander, scientific advancement requires decades of research, controlled experiments, peer review, and careful testing. No species can simply skip these steps. Humans can. Varth replied flatly. Their scientists have a concept they call good enough engineering. They do not wait until something is perfect before using it. They build something that works most of the time, use it until it breaks, learn from the failure, and build something better. They move forward through constant failure, rather than waiting for guaranteed success. The holographic display changed again, showing a date that made the entire assembly fall silent. The day humanity achieved faster than light travel. This was the moment we knew the war had changed forever, Varth said, his voice heavy with the memory. Our analysts had calculated that it would take humanity at least 500 years to develop FDL technology on their own. They gave them a 30% chance of figuring it out in 200 years if they had access to captured Dracorian drives to study. He gestured at the date on the display. They did it in 23 months. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs, and Varth waited patiently for the noise to die down before continuing. We still do not fully understand how they accomplished this. The humans we captured refused to give us technical details, and the scientists who developed the drive died defending their laboratory when we tried to capture them. What we do know is that they combined principles from our technology with theoretical work their own physicists had been developing for decades. The holographic display showed a small, ugly spacecraft launching from a hidden facility on Earth's moon. It was barely larger than a Dracorian shuttle, covered in mismatched plates of armor and bristling with improvised weapons. And it looked like something a child might build from spare parts. This was the first human FDL vessel, Varth said. They called it the Spite of Earth. Within hours of its first successful jump, they had attacked a Dracorian supply station 3 light years from their home system. The recording of that first attack played on the holographic display. The tiny human ship appeared out of nowhere, fired a barrage of plasma bolts and missiles at the station's fuel storage tanks, and jumped away before the station's defense systems could even identify the threat. The station was destroyed, Varth confirmed. 40,000 tons of fuel and ammunition, gone in an instant. And with it, gone was our assumption that the war would remain contained to the Sol system. The Silurian ambassador's voice trembled as he asked the question everyone was thinking. Commander, did the humans pursue the war beyond their own system? Varth's answer was a single word that carried more weight than any speech. Yes. The holographic display changed to show a map of Dracorian space, with red dots indicating attacks. There were dozens of them, scattered across supply routes and outposts and colony worlds. They built more ships, faster than we could track. They recruited pilots from their population and trained them in weeks rather than years. And they sent those ships out into our territory with orders to destroy everything they could find. Voreth's voice grew quieter, more reflective, but it was not the attacks themselves that broke our will to continue the war. It was the message that accompanied them. The chamber fell absolutely silent as Voreth activated another recording. A human voice spoke in perfect Dracorian, transmitted on military frequencies that should have been impossible to access. You came to our world. You burned our cities. You killed our children. We have not forgotten. We will never forget. And now, we are coming for you. The recording ended, and Voreth looked out at the assembly with eyes that had seen too much. This message was broadcast with every attack. It was painted on the hulls of their ships. It was the last thing our soldiers heard before human weapons tore through their stations. He paused, letting the words sink in. Do you understand what this means? The humans were not fighting for territory or resources or political power. They were fighting for revenge. And they wanted us to know it. The holographic display showed casualty reports from the second and third years of the war. Dracorian losses mounted steadily, while human losses, though still enormous, seemed to have no effect on their ability to fight. We killed nearly 1 billion humans during this war, Voreth admitted. 1 billion thinking beings, dead because we wanted their planet. And do you know what happened to their war production, their recruitment numbers, their willingness to continue fighting? He answered his own question with bitter amazement in his voice. They all increased. Every death we inflicted made them stronger. Every attack we launched gave them more reason to keep fighting. Every victory we claimed just convinced them that they needed to build more ships and train more soldiers. Voreth shook his head slowly. That was when the High Command finally understood what I had been trying to tell them since the end of the first year. We were not going to win this war. We could not win this war, because victory against humanity would require us to kill every single one of them. And we simply did not have the resources to do that. He looked directly at the assembly, so we asked for peace. And we prayed to whatever gods might be listening that they would accept. The assembly sat in stunned silence as Voreth deactivated the holographic display and stood alone on the central platform. His scarred body seemed smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of the story he had shared, and his eyes carried a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. The ceasefire negotiations lasted 4 of their months, he said quietly. 4 months of sitting across tables from human diplomats who looked at us with eyes that held no fear. Only cold calculation and barely contained hatred. The Velthrani ambassador spoke gently, her ancient voice filled with the curiosity that had driven her species to become scholars rather than warriors. Commander, what terms did they demand? Voreth let out a sound that might have been a laugh, but there was no humor in it. That was the strangest part of the entire war, he admitted. We expected them to demand territory, reparations, technology transfers. All the things that defeated species usually demand from their conquerors. Instead, they asked for something we had never encountered before. He paused, gathering his thoughts before continuing. They asked for recognition. They wanted the Dominion to publicly acknowledge that we had invaded their world without justification, that we had committed crimes against their civilian population, and that humanity had earned the right to exist as a free and sovereign species. Several representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Sensing where this was going, we agreed to everything, Voreth said flatly. We agreed to withdraw all forces from their system, to never return without invitation, to pay compensation for the damage we had caused, and to broadcast a public statement acknowledging what we had done. The Krikstar ambassador clicked his mandibles in surprise. The Dominion agreed to admit wrongdoing? This is unprecedented in your entire history. We had no choice, Vorath replied. The alternative was continuing a war we could not win against an enemy who would never stop fighting. Our economists calculated that defeating humanity would require resources equal to our entire military budget for the next century. And even then, victory was not guaranteed. He began pacing slowly across the platform, his four hands clasped behind his back. But that is not why I am here today. I am not here to explain the ceasefire or to justify the decisions of the High Command. I am here to warn you about what will happen if any of you make the same mistake we did. His voice hardened, taking on the tone of a commander addressing troops before a dangerous mission. I have studied human history during my time, fighting against them. I have read their stories, watched their entertainment programs, and analyzed their cultural patterns. And what I learned terrified me more than anything I witnessed during the actual war. The assembly leaned forward, drawn in by the intensity in Vorath's voice. Humanity is a species that has survived everything their universe has thrown at them. He continued. Their planet has frozen over and thawed again. Their ancestors have faced predators and plagues and famines that killed millions. They have split the atom and nearly destroyed themselves with the weapons they created. He stopped pacing and faced the assembly directly. And through all of this, they have never given up. They have never accepted extinction. They have never stopped fighting for survival, even when logic and reason said they should surrender. The Silurian ambassador raised a tentacle. Commander, every species has survival instincts. This is not unique to humanity. You are wrong, Vorath replied firmly. Most species fight to survive. Humans fight to win. There is a difference that you must understand if you want your civilizations to continue existing. He pointed toward the now dark holographic projector. When we invaded their world, we expected them to calculate the odds and realize that resistance was futile. We expected them to surrender to save what remained of their population. We expected them to behave rationally. His voice dropped lower, carrying a warning that made the bravest warriors in the chamber feel a chill. Humans do not behave rationally when they are threatened. They become something else entirely. They call it many things: determination, stubbornness, grit, spite. But what it really means is that they will sacrifice everything, including themselves, to ensure that anyone who threatens them pays an unacceptable price. Vorath resumed his pacing, his boots echoing in the silent chamber. Right now, as we speak, humanity is rebuilding their world. They are constructing new cities, developing new technologies, and building a fleet that will make the ships they used against us look like children's toys. He stopped and turned to face the assembly one final time, and they are watching us. They are monitoring our communications, studying our military deployments, and preparing for the possibility that we or any other species might threaten them again. The Velthrani ambassador spoke carefully, choosing her words with the precision of her ancient civilization. Commander, what do you suggest we do? Should we isolate humanity, contain them before they become too powerful to stop? Vorath shook his head firmly. That would be the worst possible decision. Any attempt to contain or restrict humanity will be seen as an act of aggression, and they will respond accordingly. They will not wait for you to strike first. They will build weapons capable of reaching your worlds, and they will use them without hesitation. He took a deep breath before delivering his final recommendation. Trade with them. Establish diplomatic relations. Treat them with the respect they have earned. And most importantly, never, under any circumstances, give them a reason to see you as an enemy. Vorath walked to the edge of the platform and looked out at the 400 species assembled before him. I have conquered 17 worlds in my career. I have defeated enemies that outnumbered my forces 10 to 1. I have never known fear in battle until I met humanity. His voice carried across the chamber with absolute sincerity. Learn from my mistake. Do not make enemies of the humans, because if you do, They will not rest until your civilization is nothing but ash and memory. A cautionary tale that their children will tell their children for generations to come. He stepped back from the edge of the platform and bowed his head. Slightly, I have delivered my warning. What you do with it is your choice. But remember my words when you make your decisions about how to deal with the species from the third planet of a small, yellow star. Vorath turned and walked away from the platform, leaving the assembly in stunned silence. Behind him, 400 species sat in their seats, quietly reconsidering everything they thought they knew about the galaxy and their place in it. And on a small blue planet spinning in the darkness of space, humanity looked up at the stars with eyes that held no fear, only endless curiosity and an unbreakable determination to find their place among the infinite lights above. They had fought for their survival and won. Now they would fight for their future, and nothing in the galaxy would stop them from claiming it. The universe had tried to break humanity, and humanity had answered with fire and steel and an unstoppable will to survive. The stars belonged to everyone, and humanity was coming to take their share.